Welcome back to the West London Witch. This episode includes stories about cults, serial killers, suicide, violence against children, and opens with a real 911 phone call. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
911 emergency.
Police.
What's going on?
By 515th Street.
What's going on there, ma'am?
We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please.
Explain to me what's going on, okay?
There's a note left and our daughter's gone.
A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter?
6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old. It's a note here.
It's a ransom note?
It says FBTC. Victory. Please.
Okay, what's your name? Are you
Kathy Ramsey, I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please.
I'm sending an officer over, okay?
Please.
Do you know how long she's been
No,
gone?
I don't. Please, we just got out. Is she right here? Oh my God, please.
Okay,
Please, there's somebody.
I am, honey.
Please.
Take a deep breath for me,
Please,
okay?
hurry.
Patsy.
In the quiet and early hours of December 26, 1996, Patricia Ramsey awoke to every parent's worst nightmare. At the bottom of the staircase in her Boulder, Colorado family home, Patsy found a 3-page rambling ransom note that demanded $118,000 in exchange for the safe return of her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét. After running upstairs to check her daughter's now empty bedroom, Patsy frantically reached for the phone and called the Boulder Police Department, ignoring the ransom note's warning not to inform the authorities or friends. Patsy called the police dispatcher at 5:52, and by 5:55, the police were already at the Ramsey residence. Along with the police, Patsy also called friends who flocked to the house to search for JonBenét. The police did an immediate search of the property, but found no signs of a break-in or of little JonBenét. As the morning wore on and JonBenét had still not been found, her father, John, decided to pay the ransom. Not 3 years prior, Stephen Wynn, the Las Vegas hotel mogul, paid $1.4 million in ransom and was successfully reunited with his daughter. Maybe it would be the same for the Ramseys. But they never received any additional contact or information from the kidnappers. Authorities did believe that she had been kidnapped and secured her room as a crime scene. But the rest of the home was open to the family, friends, the family minister, and victims' advocates. They touched, cleaned, tidied, and rearranged the home, totally violating and contaminating the crime scene. By 1 p.m, after no contact from the kidnappers and no leads into the case, Detective Arndt suggested that John and his friend, Fleet White, do another search of the home and take note of anything that may seem suspicious. They decided to start the search of the 7,240 square foot home in the basement, start from the bottom and move to the top. In a room in the basement, John discovered the lifeless body of his precious 6-year-old daughter. Her wrists were bound, duct tape covered her mouth, and around her neck was a nylon cord. She appeared to have been strangled to death. The contamination of the crime scene only got worse when John picked up his child's body and brought her upstairs. The entire investigation was totally mismanaged from the start, and instantly, this case became the #1 news story in the USA. I remember it vividly. JonBenét was a year older than me. Her photo was on every news report, magazine cover, front page of every newspaper. Talk shows discussed potential suspects. Did the parents do it? Was the ransom note fake? Was it retribution for something that happened at John's work? Or was it a perverse child predator? Everywhere you went that winter, JonBenét was the top story. A topic of much discussion and debate was over the sexualization of JonBenét. She participated in beauty pageants, and the newspapers ran endless photos of the tiny child dolled up in frilly costumes studded in gems and jewels. Her hair was perfectly curled and coiffed, and her innocent cherubic features were covered in thick stage makeup. She was absolutely beautiful. Unreal. To me, as a 5-year-old, I was shocked by her beauty, dazzled by her golden locks and thick black lashes, and drooled over her elegant dresses. She was unlike any child I had ever seen. I very clearly remember standing in line at an Albertsons with my mom and pointing to a picture of JonBenét on the front of the National Enquirer. I asked my mom if I'd be that beautiful when I turned 6. Like all mothers do, she told me I was already beautiful. I then proceeded to tell her that it was sad that such a pretty little girl went away. I didn't understand the concept of death at the time. But I told my mom not to worry. No one would take me. They only wanted special, beautiful children like JonBenét. To this day, JonBenét's killing has never been solved. There are endless theories and suspicions floating around the internet, but no one has ever been convicted, and the case has no resolution. We don't know who killed JonBenét or the events that led up to her death. What we do know is a little girl was murdered by blunt force trauma to the head, causing her skull to fracture, and asphyxia by way of strangulation. A homemade garrote constructed from a nylon cord and a broken paintbrush was found around JonBenét's neck and is suspected as the instrument for the strangulation. There was not any semen found at the scene, but there are theories that she may have been sexually assaulted as well. Everyone was a suspect in this case, with the top theories pointing fingers at John and Patsy Ramsey. But alas, 27 years later, this case is still a mystery. JonBenét would be 33 now, but instead, she will forever be the most beautiful little blonde girl I have ever set my eyes on. Hey friends, it's Becca. For the past 3 years, the West London Witch team have been dedicated to bringing you the best supernatural stories at the highest studio quality. And by team, I mean me and my buddy Danny. We do this work totally for free because we love it. We're proud of our content and appreciate the wonderful interactions we get to have with storytellers and listeners just like yourself. If you're enjoying the West London Witch, maybe consider joining our Patreon. It's a way to further engage with us and show your support for two creatives. If you're in a position to spare enough each month for us to grab a cup of coffee in between edits or add to the piggy bank for a new microphone, we would love to see you in our Patreon community. But I know times are tough, so if you're not in a position to join Patreon right now, that's okay. We aren't going anywhere. Head on over to patreon.com/The West London Witch. For as little as £1, $1, €1 a month, you can gain full access to our coven, a space where we share behind-the-scenes stories, dive deeper into each episode, answer your questions, and have special little treats to thank you for sharing your love and kindness with your favorite little witch. Hello and welcome to episode 52 of The West London Witch, a podcast where we share stories about those moments where we find ourselves very much not alone. Everyone collects something. From the mundane to the extraordinary, we all have an assortment of items that are precious to us. Some are valuable, some are sentimental, and some just make us feel good. I personally have a collection of Barbie dolls still in their boxes from my childhood. I also collect coffee cups from every place I've ever traveled to. And on the stranger side, I collect spatulas. Why? I don't know. I just like them. And that's the thing about collections. They can vary from the wonderful to the weird. But today, we will be talking about a collection of items that are macabre, sad, and yet still fascinating. Our friend Mike from the Paranormal Road Trippers connected me with a man who collects, collates, and preserves cult and serial killer items. Taylor, the owner of Cult Collectibles, is here to talk about the world of murderabilia, how he got into it, what he collects, and why he continues on this quest for traditionally taboo items. You might be surprised what this world looks like and its strange intersection with the paranormal as well. I'm Rebecca Strazina, and this is The West London Witch, Episode 52, Cult Collectibles.
So my name's Taylor. I run cultcollectibles.org, which is kind of accidentally has become a very large cult and true crime memorabilia or artifact, whatever you want to call it, kind of curation gallery and store. I got into this years ago kind of as a hobby. Didn't realize it could really evolve into a job in any context. I kind of came second place as an afterthought to sort of sustain this as a hobby. So I always had a huge interest in horror movies and horror video games and scary stories and kind of creepy and macabre aspects of media or just life in general. Had this kind of just I guess the typical high school goth kind of attitude towards that sort of entertainment. And over the years, I would try and find the most extreme movies, the most disturbing movies, and I would get into true crime cases a bit and just kind of had this sort of was curating, I guess, through my life, just this interest in all these darker things.
Taylor's evolution of interests evolved from classic horror films to splatterpunk subgenre to true crime and eventually to cults in particular. After watching a documentary about Jonestown with a buddy, he became totally intrigued by the journey of Jim Jones and his parishioners turned victims.
We both got very infatuated with it. It was just extremely interesting to me how one person not only could maintain a congregation of followers for years and years and years in the United States, but then move almost 1,000 of these people to the middle of the jungle, build a whole settlement out there. Obviously, that's where Jonestown comes in the People's Temple story. Watching the documentary, like I said, I was very infatuated with it, very interested. And I thought, well, this obviously encompasses only a small time period of their history. This was a few years they were in the jungle, and they had not only were they in San Francisco for a long time before that, but different parts of California and Indiana and just all over the states. And I wanted to learn more about all of that, like what led to it. So the best way, as far as I was concerned, was to start collecting things that would relate to it.
Taylor began to buy up and read anything and everything he could about the People's Temple. He bought everything from scholarly texts about the cult to pulp fiction fanfare, supermarket tabloid circulations, documentaries, magazines, old newspapers, and modern retellings, short summaries, true crime novels, and forensic analyses.
And I was interested in all of these stories because I wanted to just know everything that kind of led things to get to where they were. So in doing all this research and finding all these things, I eventually sort of accidentally started collecting. And then in collecting, I accidentally sort of completed the collection, so to say. There were only a limited amount of books published. There were only a limited amount of magazines printed. There's only so much you could really get. So once I got to that point, I was still interested in learning more. And then kind of accidentally I started collecting things. And I figured, well, the more I learn, the more I can collect and vice versa. I'll do more research. I'll dig into things more. I found out information like right after the suicides, there was an auction in San Francisco of all the assets of the People's Temple. So they had buses that they sold. They had, the church pews. They had unused stationery. They had sealed copies of an album they had recorded. There were all these kind of physical items there that were directly from the People's Temple, from within the building. And they got sold, and late 70s, early 80s, and no one knows what happened to them. And I figured, well, these have to be somewhere. I have to be able to maybe track some of these things down if I look hard enough.
So Taylor got to work hunting down the Lost People's Temple's property.
And I was able to find, after a few months, just an unused piece of stationery on eBay that was a return envelope for the People's Temple. And it had Jim Jones' name on it. And I thought, well, that's a really cool thing to have for a collection. I think it was a few $100. I said, okay, well, I guess I'm going to get a little serious with kind of finding the artifacts and the relics to do with this stuff. And I purchased that and then started joining some Facebook groups and networking a bit and looking for other people that collected stuff. And it seemed in doing that, there were a lot more people who are collecting serial killer items or just true crime in general, as opposed to specifically cults. So as I was looking for more things or trying to find more things to collect, occasionally a true crime item would come up that I would be interested in, whether it was a case I didn't know too much about or a letter from a pretty infamous name or a painting or drawing. And I started to get an interest in those kind of items as well.
After Taylor had ran the gamut with People's Temple, he realized that he had honed quite a craft for locating, collecting, and authenticating these specific items. Since Jonestown had been exhausted, he moved to his next cult of interest.
So I started researching Heaven's Gate. That was the next big one that I got into. And that was one that was more recent. You know, their suicides happened in 1997. So I figured, well, if I want to find things from their sort of trail and their sort of history, it might be easier because not only was it in California, which is closer to me, it was a much more recent event. So I kind of went through the same process there with getting the books and the magazines and newspapers, and that eventually turned to finding out they also had an auction where the estate of the mansion was sold off. And then I found somebody who had some drinking glasses that were from there. I was able to buy some drinking glasses. I learned of some people who had some clothing from within the mansion. That led to some bigger collection.
In the process of collecting physical cult items, Taylor was introduced to the world of murder memorabilia. He figured that since people had been collecting serial killer items for decades, there surely wasn't anything left for him. He was concerned he would only be able to collect items from secondhand sources, therefore making them harder to authenticate, buy, or resell.
So my attitude for a long time was just, okay, well, I'm going to collect these things that I'm interested in. Then with Heaven's Gate, when I kind of got through with that, where things became a lot harder to find, I started looking into the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas. And then after that, I started looking into Aum Shinrikyo, who are a Japanese doomsday cult who perpetrated the Tokyo subway sarin gas attacks. And that was kind of the point where I sort of felt like I had some impact on, I guess, the collecting market. With Aum Shinrikyo, there wasn't really anything in North America to collect. The things were all in Japan. And in Japan, they had a huge following, of course. They had a huge reputation there. They had their own stores where they sold books and magazines. They had their own publishing company. They had an anime series they put out. They had a manga, which was used to recruit younger Japanese kids. And I started meeting contacts in Japan and finding auction sites and just sort of sourcing items I could get from Aum Shinrikyo out there that were never available for people who collect out in North America. So my kind of thought process at that time was, well, let me buy, in bulk, so to say. Let me try and get as much as I can and bring it over here, and then I'll have some interesting things to trade that nobody's seen before.
Once Taylor had amassed this bulk buy, he needed a place to advertise these items.
And the whole idea was, well, I'll make a website so that I can network a bit and just trade some items with people and build my own collection. It wasn't ever intended as a job at all. At the time, I was reselling on eBay full-time for work. I was selling trading cards and video games and vintage t-shirts and things like that I had thrifted. It was my full-time job. And I had put up some O.J. Simpson pogs, which were like a novelty item from the 90s. And eBay flagged it as promoting violent content, which I'm not going to argue with their policies, right? They have pretty strict policies on true crime items, but a lot of things are okay on there. I think it just kind of depends on if you get flagged or not for whatever reason. It's sort of a luck of the draw. So I got really worried because I couldn't list anything for a week, and that was my full-time job at the time. I took that listing down. I said, okay, well, I'll make a site. I'll put all the kind of items together. I've amassed a few true crime things. I've amassed a lot of true crime paperbacks and magazines thrifting. And then I have obviously my cult things. And when I get to a certain point, it's like, okay, I don't need 4 copies of this People's Temple item. I don't need 8 of the same Heaven's Gate book. I'll make a site so I can trade and sell the stuff.
Thus was the beginning of cultcollectibles.org. Much to Taylor's astonishment, the website quickly gathered momentum, and he soon left behind the trading cards and video games and began to move full-time into the buying, selling, and trading of more obscure items.
As that happened, the same kind of research things went through my mind, the same kind of ideas of, oh, well, if I went and looked at importing items from Japan, maybe I can look at items from here. Maybe I can, cold call some record stores in rural small towns that might have a record that had a member on it who was in a cult or who became a serial killer, or maybe I can maybe I'll sign up for yearbook sites and then find out what years certain people went to certain schools and find yearbooks that they had. And maybe if I get lucky, I'll find a signed one. And as I was sort of doing this, I put in more time into it, I was able to find more interesting items.
Taylor had become a veritable detective in order to find these items. It's not easy to locate them. You have to really want to find this stuff.
Kind of some of the highlights from starting out, I was able to find through a lot of research and a lot of work. It's not just I can type in and find it. This is, I had to make dummy accounts on sites and sign up and do research, look through digital yearbooks, find a photo if this person was in it, at which year they were in it, then try and find those yearbooks on eBay or auction sites, or save certain sellers that might have it at some point because they go to estate sales in the area. I was able to get a yearbook from when Marshall Applewhite was in high school, who went on to become the leader of the Heaven's Gate cult, that he had signed. So getting a signature from him, I thought was pretty exciting because it's not like he was in prison and I could write him a letter, or it's not like somebody who has been in prison for a long time and written things and I could just go buy a letter from somebody else. This was just, you would have had to only get it through that source. So
from there, Taylor's collection began to grow and move into realms that he had never even imagined before. But he was about to take some serious financial risks investing in these new items.
So shortly after this, I found a really interesting cult-specific collection. Chuck Humphrey, who was a member of Heaven's Gate, he didn't, as they put it, exit his vehicle, I guess as kind of the public saw it as. He didn't commit suicide with the group when they had their very infamous suicide in their mansion in Rancho Santa Fe. He was still around, and he did a bit of a media circuit right after the suicides. He went on some talk shows. He went around to different events and did lectures. He actually produced some promotional materials. He published his own version of the kind of Heaven's Gate guidebook that they had released. He made CD-ROM sets that contained, dozens of hours of audio with Marshall Applewhite. He had the collection of all their videos they had made. But being that it was in the 90s, he also had a few items like mouse pads and mugs and printed shirts and just kind of promotional items you would see for any sort of small business then. And he was kind of a one-man person sort of advocating for the group and saying, hey, we know that society thinks we're all crazy, but this is what these people wanted to do. This is what they really believed in. So he kind of ran this little business for about a year. And then he took his own life a year later, kind of in an attempt to join the rest of his class, as they called it. So he produced all these items, took his own life. They went into storage at some point, and then years later, somebody found them and said, "Hey, I've got these boxes of CD-ROMs and these books and these mugs and a couple shirts, and I don't know what to do with it. I don't know if there's any value here." And I had come in touch with this person just kind of because I was always kind of looking for these things. Purchased the whole collection, which was very, very expensive at the time and very risky for me. I wasn't really sure if it would be beneficial to do this. I just thought, well, I can't pass on this. Never going to come again. I had an early collection as well of letters from Richard Ramirez and a bunch of photographs that were taken of him with a smuggled camera in prison. Somebody had taken a camera in, taken photos of him during a visit they weren't allowed to have, smuggled it out and developed them. They had been seen before publicly, but not in the high quality originals. There weren't like really high quality scans of it. the way I felt about it was, well, this is a new thing. This is a new item that somebody doesn't have.
The more Taylor dove into the true crime world, the more other collectors began to reach out to him.
It's obviously a bit of a niche genre. There aren't a ton of people scavenging to find all this stuff all the time. It was just kind of like, okay, well, there are some people interested. And if I meet those people, then maybe I'll be able to have, I guess, constant business flow, so to say, constant transactions of getting new things and getting rid of old things. And not only was I able to kind of refine my collection and pick out my favorite things and keep those separate, but I also was able to add things to other people's collections that they had never seen, right?
This market is niche. There are a finite amount of people looking to buy, sell, and trade these items. But this underground world led Taylor to some interesting new places because some of his items didn't just appeal to private collectors.
I was able to curate some pretty rare items that ended up in some museums, which is very cool for me because I felt pretty proud about that because I was sort of from the beginning trying to curate and track down these things that would have been lost otherwise, with things like that signed yearbook that could have just gone into a thrift store and nobody knew what it was. It could have sat in an antique bookstore for 100 years and nobody would ever find it and realize the significance behind it. So it was a bit of validation of like, well, I've been doing this independently for 2 or 3 years now. And the only feedback I get is some collectors who think it's interesting. Now there's historical value to this, to some of these things that I'm finding. That sort of transitioned me into a bit of, well, maybe I can work with some media companies. Maybe I can work with documentaries or podcasts, or even just personally archive things nobody's seen before, whether it's letters that nobody's seen or photographs or audio or any kind of media.
Taylor began to gain quite a reputation in this field, which led him to receiving a very serious email about a very serious collection.
Just over 2 years ago now, I think, I got an email from somebody saying, hey, I don't know if you're interested in purchasing this, but we have a large collection of Jeffrey Dahmer items that we've had it in storage for a long time. We're not sure what to do with it. We thought maybe you'd be a person who'd be interested in buying it. And red flags went up right away because of all the people to collect in true crime. Jeffrey Dahmer was kind of the white whale. There isn't really anything from him out there. He was in prison for 2 years before he was killed. So the only real things that anybody had to collect were letters that he had written from prison to pen pals. And he received a ton of mail incoming and obviously didn't have time to respond to too many people outgoing, or didn't care to, not too sure. But there have basically been a handful of letters circling between collectors over the years. And oftentimes somebody would get one and they would never leave their collection again because it was sort of a holy grail.
Taylor was immediately suspicious. He thought he was being scammed. He was convinced he was going to be asked to send a bunch of money on PayPal and receive nothing in return.
This stuff didn't exist as far as I knew. I got to talking to them. I actually called, which I'm very glad I did. I called the number they left and I said, hey, just so you know, I'm nervous about this. I'm seeing a lot of red flags, not because of any judgment on you, just because of these items being so rare and nobody knowing about them.
Taylor was able to authenticate that the owner had legitimate connections with the Dahmer family and had acquired these items in a true and rightful fashion.
And I said to them, well, I don't think I'd be able to give you a fair price for all this stuff. I would rather kind of manage this collection for you because not only are there, photos and audio and things here that should be archived historically, should be used in some capacity for media or, at least made public online for people to see because it's new information, and all of this stuff kind of helps in forensic research or just in a historical sense. So we kind of came to an agreement where they were going to send me the collection of items and I would archive it for them. I would go through and categorize everything. I would find, if some pieces should go to a museum or if some pieces should go to collectors. I sort of became the manager for this collection on their behalf. And in doing that, I was able to sort through hundreds of documents that hadn't been seen before. I received a lot of really interesting items. There were obviously some things that were handwritten from Jeff. There were items from his apartment. There were items from his time in prison. There were items from his childhood, from before prison. There was a multi-page handwritten essay he had done in high school. There were just things that nobody's seen before. And then it wrapped up to being some pretty intense stuff. There were pairs of his glasses, his iconic kind of the Dahmer glasses, so to say. There were some of the original photos that people have seen before online, or in documentaries, the originals of those pictures. His baby album and some photos in there that were in Lionel Dahmer's book, all the way up to, I think, kind of what I've become associated with as one of the bigger items in my collection, or at least in the office right now, is his urn from when he was cremated, which has a very small amount of his ashes in there, just a bit of residue, I would say. It's not like his ashes were spread. There's just a little bit of kind of dust on the inside of the bags in that. But that's a one-of-a-kind, unique item that otherwise would have just been eventually thrown out. It was in storage. It had some water damage and was didn't really have a trajectory to be preserved anywhere.
Taylor came into managing this collection about a year and a half before the Netflix series about Jeffrey Dahmer and the subsequent documentary.
I kind of had this long period of time of, okay, let me kind of organize these things and find the right collectors. Let me see what I'd like to have in my collection. And then when the new Netflix series came out, which was followed by a Netflix documentary on Dahmer, it kind of crashed my site for a bit, because it was the only spot you could find any of this Dahmer stuff anywhere for anybody who was interested in the tangible items related to his case.
Now, at this point, you may be thinking the same thing I was. Sure, I'm interested in true crime. I'm fascinated by a serial killer documentary or a cult biography. But there's no way I'm going to spend my money on a Jack Kevorkian drawing or a letter written by Ted Bundy. So, who is buying these items? And why?
I think for the most part, the people I sell to and the people that collect are people who want to have that closer connection. I have some clients who collect only for one case. I've got a good friend who he only collects Heaven's Gate items, and because he sort of had this hyper focus, now he has one of the actual uniforms from Heaven's Gate. He has one of the bunk beds from inside the mansion. He's got coroner reports. He's got anything you could think of, dozens and dozens, probably hundreds at this point of items relating to Heaven's Gate. I have a lot of clients who want to have one piece from each big name. They're sort of curating their own museum in their own homes, Yeah, it's kind of people all over the place. I have clients worldwide. I know some people who are in very kind of elite professions who collect some of this stuff, who only collect sort of higher end, one-of-a-kind items. I have people who look for specific things, people who collect only hand tracings, for instance, that an inmate made in prison, or only letters, but letters from different names, or only letters from one person, and they want to have the biggest collection of Charles Manson or the biggest collection of whichever name. Obviously, I don't interact with everybody I sell things to. A lot of it is just, sales through the site. But the people I do talk with tend to be very passionate about their own specific kind of subgenre of collecting. It's not that, like you would expect. It's just these like really rugged, crazy people covered in tattoos who are super like the people you wouldn't typically think do this. It's every kind of person. I have clients who are moms with big families and people you wouldn't necessarily expect to want to have this close connection with such a taboo topic.
What do you say to people who say that this is glorifying the killers, or that we don't actually need to preserve this stuff? We don't need this in circulation. What do you say to those people?
One of the most important things when I got into this, obviously I was aware of how controversial it could be, was to not ruffle people's feathers and not upset anybody to the best that I can. Obviously, I've had some negative feedback over the years, and I've had some people who don't appreciate it or understand it or are just, offended or disgusted by it, which I can totally understand. And I wouldn't try and argue against those people to convince them. I mean, obviously, legally, there's no issues here with collecting these things or owning these items. It's the same legalities as collecting or owning anything, right? Just my personal possessions. and I can do with them what I wish. So I wouldn't ever, somebody who was, maybe affected by one of these crimes or has somebody they were close to who was, or would have a reason to be offended or upset, I would never try and convince somebody this is why it's okay, this is why it's good. I try and do this while causing the least harm to people that I can. The only reason that I'm selling items isn't to kind of try and profit off of dark things. It's just so I can keep the momentum going and find new things. If I wanted to devote all my time to finding new information or new media and weird or obscure items, I had to kind of go in 100%. And a lot of the things that I found now, I've put hundreds and hundreds of hours of work into finding one specific item or one specific collection. I wouldn't be able to do that if I wasn't doing this full time. And I can see why somebody would be offended or upset or think that's profiting off of things you shouldn't profit off of. But it's sort of become this interesting situation where, for instance, the new Jeffrey Dahmer series, when that came out, I faced a lot of backlash of having these items to do with somebody who a lot of people were just finding out about his case for the first time and realizing this was a really bad guy. These things shouldn't be out there. This is very offensive. And while I can understand that, there wasn't as much feedback towards the Netflix series, which A, was retelling an old story that, with no new information, and B, made each person involved with that project made more money on it than I will ever make my entire life in doing this for work. But people kind of look at that as, oh, well, it's media, it's entertainment, we're educating people. And I've gotten to this point now where not only do I have some items that are in museums, but I've worked with documentaries and with different podcasts and with publishers in getting new information, photos nobody's seen, reports nobody's seen, documents nobody's seen, video and audio even. I've worked with people in getting new things out there. So, when a new documentary comes out, there's things involved with it that may have involvement with my curation, so to say. And the biggest criticism I sort of faced was, well, it's not productive. You're not finding anything new. You're not providing anything new to this. And some of these kind of podcasts that have a bit of a comedic undertone to them, but talk about these true crime things, and they're just retelling the stories as they've been before. They're not doing new research. They're not finding new information. They're just retelling these stories to a larger audience. There's obviously value to that, but a lot of the stuff I'm doing now is bringing new information and new content out there about these cases that otherwise these things would have been, kept in storage forever or destroyed or thrown away. People didn't see the value in it.
The thing about these items is, once they end up in a private collection, they may never re-enter the public domain again, which means archivists, doctors, law enforcement, and authors may never have access to study them. There may be clues, signs, personality traits, or warnings in these items that could help identify markers in future perpetrators. So by preserving them, collecting them, and categorizing them, Taylor can keep them accessible for further and future study.
It's just everyone's own kind of interpretation of it. I can't help if somebody feels a certain way about it, but what I can do is just try and keep a low profile and not shove this in the face of somebody who doesn't want to see it or doesn't want to know about it.
If you can get past the severity of these items, the next question Taylor is always asked is, are the former owners of these items still connected to them from the other side?
The next sort of thing that happened with that is I got in touch with the Vancouver Paranormal Society and sent an email saying, hey, I don't know if you guys are really interested in this sort of thing. I know it's a bit taboo and a lot of people I reach out to don't really want to work together or be involved with it, but I have a very expansive collection of true crime items. And I get asked more than anything else if there's any kind of paranormal activity or haunting or negative energy associated with these physical items. I would say I'm a light skeptic, I don't not believe in any of that, but I personally haven't had any kind of experiences. And the thought crossed my mind, well, maybe I'm just desensitized. I've been dealing in these things. It went from the point of I would get a letter in the mail from, a serial killer and be like, whoa, this is the craziest thing I ever owned, to then, somebody's urn would get shipped to my house. And I'd be like, well, this is neat. I'll just put this in the inventory. And it just desensitization based on being around it all day, every single day, not only as a hobby, but also for my full-time job, right? And I said, listen, maybe there's an interest in you guys taking a look at some stuff or doing some readings or just curiosity based on the fact that we're both working in these sort of fringe circles, and there's a bit of connection there.
And that brings us to our friend Mike with the Paranormal Road Trippers. Mike specializes in haunted objects. He personally collects and studies haunted dolls and artifacts, but never before anything like Taylor's collection.
I met Taylor last year now. I've been working with him and the Vancouver Paranormal Society for the last year, doing a documentary on the paranormal with serial killer memorabilia. And what he was curious to know was the reason he reached out to the teams is because he wanted to know what type of energy these items could hold, if they have energy, if they're even haunted, because the amount of trauma they've seen, they've been a part of. Like he had Jeffrey Dahmer's glasses. Like Dahmer's eyes looked out of those glasses, which is kind of surreal and unsettling to even be a part of. I held them, I looked at them, I looked through the lenses. It was just, I didn't kind of like the no feeling looking at those.
The team set to work to see if the no feelings from these items were just their personal responses or were actually paranormally motivated.
But the first night, we did something called the Estes method. The investigator with the item was in one room, and the other investigators were in a completely other room asking the questions. So he's alone, he's isolated. So we had no contamination. We had an audio recorder rolling in his room and the room the investigators were in asking the questions. Taylor handpicked 4 items, and it was me and 3 other investigators. And these investigators did not know what they would be researching because they're blindfolded. So one of the ones was a hand-painted painting by John Wayne Gacy. And we actually got an EVP through that. We were just asking questions, and we get an EVP. It was a loud male whisper that said, "I give."
Have a listen to this EVP and see what you hear. I've listened to it hundreds of times, and I actually hear, "That's me," or "It's me."
That's your turn.
Here it is, one more time. Did you hear "I give" or "That's me"? Hit me up on Facebook or Instagram and let me know your thoughts on this EVP.
Obviously, we didn't hear it until playback when we go home and review our evidence. And another one we got was a male whispering. It was Ronnie asking Ronnie was one of the investigators on the team, asking how many spirits were with us. And a male whispered, "There are 3.
How many spirits are with us? You tell Mike how many, please.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, it was like a ching-ching sound.
Obviously, like I said, we don't hear that live listening, but when we pull clips like this, it's kind of unsettling. It's what we're looking for, but it's just verifying that there were spirits with us. One of the creepiest things is when I went into the Estes method, and I was holding a Bible that was donated to Jeffrey Dahmer that was in his prison cell. And I was sitting there. I'm always a chicken doing the Estes method anyway, so I'm always heightened. And it literally felt like somebody was in front of me, coming towards me, and then I felt something grab my arm. What felt like something grabbed my arm, and I jumped pretty good and I do a loud swear, take the headphones off, the blindfold off, and called off the rest of my session on that. And then we put Taylor under in the Estes method. And man, he lasted 15 seconds. He couldn't do it. He said it was overwhelming.
Mike, how did you feel being around all of this stuff?
It was interesting to document. There's in no way glorifying any of these killers, cults, because I think they're all bad, straight up. There's no excuse or anything for human behavior when they act like that. I was intrigued. I was respectful to not glorify, because obviously these people have victims that are still alive, that's families and families and families have impacted. I felt, well, that's a hard question. Intrigued to obtain evidence to see if there is any sort of energy attached to these items, if there's any sort of message that somebody wants to get across that they haven't been able to speak.
To an extent, we are all intrigued on some level by these dark tragedies and the items that still survive. This was never more apparent to me than with my own obsession regarding the JonBenét Ramsey case. To me, JonBenét Ramsey was a fantasy creature, a superhuman beauty. She wasn't like me or my friends at school. She would never wear old jeans or Disney t-shirts. She wouldn't wear stinky jelly shoes or have her hair in a messy ponytail tied up in a rainbow scrunchie. She was a picture of platinum blonde perfection, clean, bright, and alabaster white. But a few years ago, while watching a documentary on the case, I saw photos of her bedroom that shocked me to the core. Her room was a lot like mine. She had scrunchies on her bedpost, clothes strewn around the room, toys on her nightstand, and Beauty and the Beast bed linens. The exact same bed linens as me. In that moment, JonBenét wasn't a beauty queen, a morbid fascination, or a cold case on the Boulder PD's roster. She was just like me, a little girl who loved the color pink, Barbies, and Beauty and the Beast. She was humanized, and I felt a deep sadness for her that I had never felt, understood, or experienced before. I don't know if collecting, selling, or trading serial killer and cult items is wrong or right, or if we should even pass that type of judgment. But I do know that Taylor's work with museums is helping preserve history. His collection and collation of letters and writings is helping educate forensic psychologists and law enforcement officers. By humanizing these victims and perpetrators, he may even be demystifying and deglamorizing them.
I'm not trying to promote this stuff to the general public. I'm not trying to bring this to people who are going to be affected by it negatively. It's a bit of a small niche underworld of people who are interested in this, and I try and stick within that just to be respectful and to not cause those issues or to cause people to feel that way.
As to whether or not these items are haunted, it's an interesting question because these items are undeniably energized. But are they holding paranormal energy? Or are we just getting spooky feels from them because we know their story, know who they belonged to?
I would say a combination of both, because I'm the guy that'll collect dark items from the paranormal history. You give me a haunted Ouija board, a doll, some sort of cursed items, photos. I'll take that all day long. But like items that these killers have touched, had energy poured into, worn daily, painted, drawn. That's their energy. It's their intent in these items. So I feel that the residual was kind of left over, perhaps. I like it. I guess maybe, but that again, like I've talked before, that could be the placebo effect. You see a haunted house, a creepy looking house, so you assume it's haunted, or a creepy doll. But sometimes when you're gone, you're gone.
Thank you to Taylor for speaking so openly and candidly with me. If you'd like to hear more of our conversation, head on over to the West London Witch Patreon for additional content. You can find Taylor at cultcollectibles.org. And don't forget to check out Mike's group, the Paranormal Road Trippers. Mike's team have a collection of spooky documentaries about their investigations online. They even have a documentary featuring Taylor. You can find them on YouTube at The Paranormal Road Trippers. Do you have a spooky story you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Drop me an email at thewestlondonwitch@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at The West London Witch. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And come and follow us for additional content on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. The West London Witch is created by me, Rebecca Strazina. Our sound designer and production magician is the incredible Danny Cross. Our theme music was bespokely written and performed by the wickedly talented Kyle Hall. Our cover art is the beautiful collaboration between Lizzie Wilson and Jake Bowser. Special thanks to Miss Sinead Bowers, our quality control and biggest cheerleader. And thank you to you, all of our listeners all over the world. These are your stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.